Welcome. My name is Sam Horn, and this is Clarity Calls. And I am so glad that you have carved time out of your busy schedule to be with us tonight. I am thrilled with our guests tonight and their clarity stories. And we have a theme tonight, and our theme is diversity and inclusion. So we start with this wonderful quote from Ava DuVernay and a quick preview of our session. For me, be about 8 minutes of a story and an example, and hopefully a call to action on diversity and inclusion. Then we'll be introducing our first guest, Kian Gohar, then our second guest, Sarah Tadet, and then Svetlana Kim, and then we'll be wrapping up with Ruth Blatt. So, rathblott, let me make sure and I get that correctly. So thank you for all putting yourself on mute so that we have a very clean recording. We have many people who watch this in the days and the weeks and the months following our clarity calls. And we have a number of people who have gotten in touch and said they want to share this with their teams in their community organizations or at their companies to catalyze conversations around diversity and inclusion. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. And if you know me, you know in 17 years of Maui Writers Conference, all our authors didn't agree on anything except this: ink it when you think it. So I hope you have paper and pen, that you are ready to take notes on some of the nuggets that you hear, some of the insights that you would like to follow up and take action on. And tomorrow we'll go ahead and put our speakers' information on our private Facebook page. So you're welcome to follow up and continue the conversation with them if you would like. All right, I'm ready to rock and roll if you are. Let's start with that wonderful quote from Ava DuVernay. This is from my Tung Fu book, and she said, "When we're talking about diversity, it's not a box to check. It is a reality that should be deeply felt and held and valued by all of us. When we're talking about diversity, it is not a box to check. It is a reality that should be deeply felt and held and valued by all of us." You know, I agree with her, which was why it was embarrassing when I realized I had unconscious bias. I've been putting on salons at the National Press Club, and when I go into a conference, instead of having all these speakers come in and then fly out, it's like, let's sit around a table and let's talk about what's going on in our life. So I have been organizing and hosting salons for years. Several years ago, I was hosting one in New York City, and this was on disruption. And I had invited entrepreneurs who had all been pioneers and who had disrupted their profession or their industry. We had Joan Fallon, the CEO of Curemark, who is disrupting the whole field of autism by developing a treatment for kids with autism. We had Jean Sullivan, who was named by Forbes as one of the top women affecting women entrepreneurs. She was the first woman partner of a woman-owned venture capital firm. We had Peggy Cappy, who is actually PBS's most successful fundraise driver, even more than Deepak Chopra or Wayne Dyer. She invented and created yoga for the rest of us. We had Nell Merlino, who started Take Our Daughters to Work Day. Boy, did she disrupt an industry. It wasn't that too long ago that when women were growing up, we had career options of being a school teacher or a nurse or a secretary or a stay-at-home mom or none of the above. And of course, now women can be in any career they want. Then we had Jenna Arnold. Jenna was the organizer of the National Women's March, and she was excited about the new book she had just written called Raising Our Hands. And the premise of the book is that white women in particular are sitting on the sidelines, and they are not taking the lead, and they are not leveraging their clout on the important issue of diversity and inclusion. And I looked around the table, and there wasn't one person of color at that table. And that wasn't okay. And I realized that there are two types of bias. There's bias by commission, where we deliberately leave people out. And there's bias by omission, when we leave people out and we're not even aware of it. It's not intentional. It just doesn't matter if it's intentional. It's a fact. And I promised myself that evening that I would never again host an event that did not have diversity represented, that was not inclusive of people of different sexual orientations, with people, ethnic backgrounds and cultures, with people of visible and invisible mental, developmental, different abilities. And so I decided at that point to stop waiting and start initiating, and to start assuming and start asking. One of the things I started doing was asking people who have differences what it's like, and then just listening. And I'll always remember when I asked a good friend and a client, Vernice Armour. Now, Vernice is probably one of the top keynoters in the country. She's spoken to like 60% of the Fortune 100 companies. And Vernice is gay, she's Black, she's a former cop and a former military pilot. And her programs on Get Gutsy have brought people to their feet all around the world. And I realized in the years that I had known Vernice, I had never once asked her what her life was like. And we had a conversation that I will remember to this day about how when she was going for her driver's license test, her dad took her out for a test drive the day before. And so he's watching her driving and giving her advice. And then when they're a block from home, he says, pull over. And she said, why? And he said, because I'm going to ask you a question that is not on the test. However, it is the most important question you need to have an answer for. He said, what do you do if you're pulled over by a cop? And she said, 10 and 2. And he said, that's right. And she said, but Dad, what if I'm not doing anything wrong? And you know what he said? It doesn't matter. Can you imagine driving in mortal fear of being pulled over by a cop? Because if you do not feel safe. You do not know what's going to happen. And many people live with that fear on a daily basis. I asked what else it was like. And she talked about how it was coming into Christmas, and she and her sister went to the mall to buy some Christmas gifts. And they walked into a Radio Shack, and the store clerk came over and asked them to take off their coats. And she started taking off her coat, but her sister said, why should we take off our coats? And the clerk said very gruffly, just take them off or else I'll have to ask you to leave. And her sister asked again, no one else in the store is taking off their coats. Why should we take off our coats? And they ended up leaving, and Vernice still didn't understand. And she turned to her sister and said, why did he ask us to take off our coats? And her sister said, because he assumed because we were Black that we were there to shoplift or to steal something. She and her brother and her dad went to a sporting event in Atlanta. And she said she'll always remember her brother and her dad telling her the story about how they went out to the parking lot to get the car. So they get on the elevator and they're going down in the basement to get the car. And just as the doors are about to close, a woman comes in and the doors close, and it is a white woman. And she looks at these two Black men and she clutches her purse to her chest and she scuttles over in the corner of the elevator and she eyes them warily. Well, P5 comes up and she starts getting off, and her brother starts getting off too, and her dad grabs him by the hoodie and pulls him back on the elevator and lets the doors close. And her brother turns to her dad and said, Dad, why are you doing that? That was our floor. And he said, it didn't matter. He said, if we had gotten off the elevator after her, who knows what might have happened, whether she would blow her whistle, whether she would get out her mace, whether she would cry for help. And once again, when it comes to bias, unconscious, by commission, by omission, when it comes to diversity and people with differences, most of the time we have no idea what life is like for them. And I believe we have a responsibility to ask and to listen and to see how we could be a better friend or a better leader or a better supporter. Ruth Ginsburg, Supreme Justice Ruth Ginsburg, was asked how she could be friends with Justice Scalia when they had such radically different political views. And she said 6 words: we are different We are one. We are different. We are one. We have so much more in common than we do in conflict. And somebody's got to go first. Why not us? Why not us going first to invite people to be on our teams, at our tables with differences? Why not go first to ask and then to listen so we truly understand what it is like to be different, to feel different, to be perceived as different? Someone goes first and we ask and we invite. Even though we're different, we can be one, and it starts with us. That's enough for me. I get to turn it over to Kian Gohar. Now, you may already know that Kian Gohar was a former executive director of the X Prize, helping people do all kinds of moonshots in all kinds of industries where they identify a problem or a need or a challenge, and these teams develop something to address it. He was also the executive director of Singularity U. You've probably heard of Ray Kurzweil and the innovative work they're doing there. Now he's in charge of GeoLab, where he's working with individuals and organizations to continue to come up with moonshots and innovative solutions to problems. And he's also started something called Lightbox, which I imagine Kian will want to tell you about. So please welcome Kian Gohar.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's lovely to be part of this incredible panel and conversation around clarity and diversity and inclusion. Thank you for having me. I'd like to start by telling you a story about how I've found clarity in the last year. So there's a very famous German-American poet and novelist. His name is Charles Bukowski. And Charles Bukowski once said, "Find what you love and let it kill you." Find what you love and let it kill you. Well, let me tell you a story about somebody who found what they loved and it actually killed them. My dad, Dr. Kian Gohar, loved to garden more than anything else in his life. It reminded him of his childhood growing up on a farm in Iran back in the 1930s. And when he retired in LA about 15 years ago, he bought a house on a hill and he decided to build a terrace of fruit trees. And he planted over 150 different fruit trees. And he loved pruning the trees. He loved picking the fruits. He loved tending his garden and seeing his dogs run happily chasing after squirrels. He was happiest in his garden. Unfortunately, one day when he was picking some fruits and he was walking up the terrace of his makeshift farm in LA, he tripped and fell on a step and he hit his head and he had some pain and he decided to go take a nap and he never woke up. And ultimately, it was an incredibly sad experience for all of us because it was a sudden accidental death almost exactly 10 years ago. But my dad was happiest in his garden, and gardening ultimately led him to his fateful accident. So my question is, in this life that now we're living post-pandemic, where we've had to deal with death and isolation over the last year, what do you want to do to have a life without regrets and a life that you'll be happiest in your garden whenever that time comes for you? For me, the pandemic meant escaping the confines of city life. I know we're a lot familiar with that. I left Los Angeles to go to the desert for a few months to escape one of the peaks of COVID. I'm also a very social and extroverted human being. And I realized that I really don't like living alone in isolation in pandemic times. I can tell that this is something many of us identify with. But as a gay man, it's often the case that we live alone. And of course, there have been tremendous advancements in justice and rights for LGBT folks. And I started a foundation that Sam alluded to called the Lightbox Foundation, which hosts personal development retreats for the LGBTQ community. But it's very common that we end up oftentimes living alone, despite the advancements in in our times. And when I went to the desert a few months ago, earlier this year, I went to live in a compound, which allowed me to have my own small little apartment. But at the same time, I shared it with a large outside space with a few other people. Some were gay, some were straight. And living in this compound in the desert made me realize that I actually am really happy living in a communal experience. And so for me, the learning that I've had, the clarity that I've had over the last year is that I want to create a space where I have more opportunities to live communally with people from different backgrounds and not self-isolate in a small apartment or a big house in the suburbs. What I love and prioritize more than anything else is adventure and experience, more than dollars and cents. And maybe one day the adventures might kill me, but I'd be happiest when that actually happens. So the decision I've made in terms of clarity is to create a space over the next 30 years of compound living all across the country where people can join and live communally for a few months at a time as a second home or as a retreat to be able to experience life communally rather than living alone, oftentimes as many folks do. Whether you're gay or straight, doesn't matter. Loneliness is a huge epidemic in America, and it is a silent killer. So in the end, my dad was happiest in his garden, and that's all that mattered. So my advice to you is find your garden now and live it like there is no tomorrow, and that tomorrow is a gift, as we've been so blessed and challenged during this pandemic. And if your garden ultimately kills you, at least you were happiest in the end because you loved it.
I tell you, Kian, I so appreciate your message about clarity, getting clear now, not someday, and that then setting it in motion. And in fact, Kian, one of the things you're known for is you have a process for helping people set their moonshots in action and getting results. And so I think we've got about 3 more minutes, and see, you're clear. You want to set up this compound living where people don't have to be lonely or alone, that they can go it together and have that support and that community. So if someone else has clear an answer to an issue, a solution to a problem, an initiative that they want to set in motion, what's the first step to putting that into practice?
Have conversations, talk to a lot of people about this idea. Ultimately, I think it's really important that you fall in love with the problem, to solve the problem rather than falling in love with your solution. I had a conversation earlier today with a friend who is a real estate developer and investor, and she questioned some of my assumptions. And she said, well, it's very likely that post-pandemic life will be very social. And I said, yes, but living as a gay man is also quite different than living in the straight world, because we have different expectations and different societal norms, even within the gay community. And so my friend encouraged me to fall in love with the problem, which in this situation is figuring out how to end loneliness in a real estate experience, in a living experience. Now, this particular compound idea may not exactly be the right one, but if I fall in love with the problem rather than my idea of what the solution is, at least that'll help me have more conversations, and it might actually help me solve the problem and scale it. So my recommendation is, once you have clarity as to what kind of problem you want to solve, have lots of different kinds of conversations. Don't fall in love with your specific solution, but rather the problem that you're trying to solve.
Einstein said, never stop questioning. And we're back to asking again, right? It's like, if we have clarity about something, it's not the end all. It's now we ask other people for their input, for the recommendations, for their contact, for their resources, because by asking, we give people an opportunity to jump on our bandwagon, right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So one more question for you, Kian, is you're probably familiar with the Harvard study that found that what we need most, what contributes to a happy, fulfilled life are meaningful relationships, and their data shows that 1 in 4 people have 0 people to confide in. 0 people to confide in. So what is your clarity about something else that each of us can do if we see someone who we feel is disconnected, doesn't have a community, is trying to go it alone without the support of others? Your suggestion?
I would say reach out to people and have conversations with them and just touch base and say, just want to call, want to see how you're doing. 22% of Americans now live in nuclear families. That means 78% of Americans do not. They either live alone, they are retired alone, they have a spouse but no kids. They live in non-traditional environments, yet our entire housing stock is built to live like we live in the 1950s. That creates a structural issue of loneliness. So reach out, call people, text them, send them an email, and just be available. Even if you have nothing specific to say, to know that you're still around in the event that you want to have that kind of conversation so you don't feel lonely. And Zoom has actually been fantastic during the pandemic to be able to reach out to people from all walks of life and friends from all past experiences across the world to stay connected. And I really encourage you to think about continuing use of Zoom post-pandemic, even when life returns to more in-person.
Well, I think we're going to be doing that. And I'm thinking that we can probably find out some more ideas in your new book that's coming out from Harvard Review Press, correct?
Yeah, thanks
Title
for...
of which is?
Yeah, the book is called Competing in the New World of Work, How Radical Adaptability Separates the Best from the Rest, to be published by Harvard Business Review Press, February 2022. It's a compilation of best practices on leadership that we've discovered over the last year from CEOs, executives, and entrepreneurs who have thrived in an otherwise really difficult pandemic, and how you can adopt some of those learnings to be able to thrive in an uncertain future.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your insights, and we'll be putting your information up in our Facebook group so people can follow up and continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm always reachable on social media at From the KGB. And thank you, Sam, for creating the space and inviting me.
You're welcome, Kian. And now we are hopping on the other side of the world. Boy, huge props to the Global Human Resource Director and the D&I Director of Schneider Electric, which is a global company. And she is signing in from Dubai. So she got up at 2:30 in the morning. So please welcome the author of please share your insights. Can't wait to hear you.
Hi, Sam. So yes,
again.
Let's start with you. So first of all, thank you so much for hosting me. It's an honor to be on this panel, and thank you, Kian, for sharing amazing insight, and it's a brilliant idea, brilliant stuff shared here. So thank you for having me. And my story is a little bit different than Kian. Well, and I would love to share a little bit and go back a little bit to 2016, Sam, where I personally embarked on a kind of a journey. I would call it a journey of transformation, or a bit of a disruption on the personal side that came a bit of after a few years of a struggle between my mind and my heart, which is not very typical to have. But while I thought personally that I had everything figured out, and I had the list of logical steps in life clear to me, my heart negated it. While my mind kind of listed the great things and accomplishments I've done in 20 plus years, bachelor's degree, working in a multinational, having a brilliant career, moving up the ladder, having the perfect partner, everything that someone at my age, a woman from the Middle East, should have and would aspire to have as per social norms, I didn't feel that way. My heart negated it. All I felt was something was wrong. I was not happy. Logic did not make sense to me, and I couldn't understand why. So after seeking some professional help, honestly, I decided to take the toughest decision of my life. And that decision was to be me. It was the toughest decision of my life to decide to be me. And me is actually to listen to what I wanted, what my intuition was telling me at the time, and break free from any social frame that society has put me into that was leading most of the decisions that I have been doing, typical to many people that used to live their lives. It was killing all the colorful things that I had and kind of blending me into, I would say, a palette of colors that would fit perfectly well into a social display case. And that is what I describe in my book, which I'll talk about in a minute. And when I decided to be me, Sam, the decision meant that I stopped thinking what people would want or what I was supposed to do and think of what I want to do. It was about stopping to think about what the future is holding and start enjoying actually the present and what, and the accomplishments that I have been doing and celebrating those accomplishments. It was about stopping to ask myself, what will people say or what will people think, and start asking how it makes me feel. So it was all of this transformation that I decided to do, and actually to be myself without fear of judgment nor rejection. Now, it was only in 2018 when I had that clarity, and I'll tell you about that. My clarity was about, it was a name to what I have felt and what I have experienced, and that name was called a call for inclusion. All I wanted was to feel included for who I was. I was so scared of being rejected or being judged I was so afraid to live my life the way I wanted to be, a woman, an ambitious woman from the Middle East who felt and knew that the sky is the limit for her, just because I was so afraid of what people would say if I wouldn't fit into that box. And in 2018, when I moved in my HR professional world to Dubai from Lebanon, I started working within Schneider in the D&I space. And that is when I learned that actually many people like me were stuck in that frame. They were so scared not only to think of who they were or what they wanted, but also they had no courage to redeem it because of fear of judgment or rejection. And this is when I decided to write the book, Inclusion Starts With You, not to share my story, Sam. It was more to call for a world where people can feel safe to be who they want to be, to feel, to leverage on their uniqueness, to understand how unique they are, and be okay with being unique and different, and leverage that in making the best out of their lives. So the book was published in November 2020, and it's really to call for a world that accepts people for their differences, for their true selves, for their uniqueness, their diversity, not only in gender or in sexual orientation or only diversity when it comes to bringing more women on the board or ticking some of the boxes that we see many corporate companies are doing and governments are doing now. What my goal was to explain that diversity and inclusion, and specifically inclusion, is a topic that touches each and every one of us. It's about diversity of mindset, of ambitions, of passions, of being different. It's really a call to embrace and promote inclusion at all levels. I was inspired by Maya Angelou, honestly, when she said, if you try to be normal, you will never understand or never know how amazing you can be. I mean, I did that. I was scared. It was tough, honestly, but I was proud that I took that step. And my call is for other people to do it. Through my book, they get an insight of my HR experience also within the D&I world, but also their personal, how can they individually move the needle in diversity and inclusion space.
I love everything that you said, Sarah, especially, you were talking about boxes, and Ava DuVernay talked about diversity is not, a box to check. And it's also not a box to keep people in, right? To tell them what they should do or how they should feel, or no, you shouldn't be ambitious, or so thank you for your insights, and what a key word there about feeling safe. Safe to feel differently, to do differently. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks.
And now we are jumping over to someone who also has a fascinating backstory. It started with a bread line in Russia, and for that you'll want to read her book, White Pearl and I. Svetlana Kim has gone on to be a person and if someone is not on mute, if you'll put yourself on mute except for Lana. That would be great. So we have a nice clean recording that other people can listen in the weeks and months ahead. So, and Svetlana has become the spokesperson for Macy's Asian American History Month. She's on the advisory board for Harvard Business Council and also for AARP. And she's also a podcaster, and maybe she'll tell us a little bit about that. It's a great pleasure to introduce Svetlana Kim.
Thank you so much, Sam, for living your life with purpose. I always admire that about you, and I'm very grateful, beyond grateful, to be here today with you, with all of the speakers and audience. So I have 4 minutes to cover 29 years of my life. So this year, December 18th, will be 30 years since I came to United States with $1 in my pocket. I still have that little tiny wallet that it's not even a wallet, little thing. I just recycled recently when I moved my old bag that was canvas from my grandmother's couch. I had no money as a student, and she made me that bag, and it had perfect holes in the end of the bag from my heavy books going to school. So when I met Sam, it's part of my serendipity story. And I realized that when I learned that my grandmother, White Pearl, just like pearls, her parents immigrated from Korea to Russia during 19th century. It was November 1899, and Russian Tsar give permission to 18 families from Korea to settle in the far east of Russia. And my grandmother's family was one of them. So 104 years later on, I take the journey escaping from Russia with $1, not speaking English, to United States. And I actually discovered what the black market is. I purchased an airline ticket on the black market. I actually talked to my mom and dad today. They live in Russia. My entire family lives in Russia. So my father discovered Facebook. So my dad is probably will be listening. So I wanted to tell, this is nothing political, but it was 3 months before the collapse of Soviet Union. Sam, you know the story. We had no bread. We had coupons to buy half of the pound of butter for a month, a box of detergent, 2 bars of soap, and the list goes on and on. And guess what? I am standing in the bread line, and Sam created the first sentence in the book. It all started with a loaf of bread that didn't even exist. Who is pulling in a black Mercedes? Leather coat, Versace sunglasses, December? It was the mafia guy, and he has last ticket to New York. And he had crushed on my girlfriend Ludmila. And I tell him, I'll take the ticket. The deal is done. He said, no, Svetlana, deal is not done. You don't even know the cost. It was $400, and I have $1. I said, I'll take the ticket, you hold, but the flight is expiring in 2 weeks. So Sam, I have 1 week to get visa. So I was right near the consulate. So the story goes on and on and on. Opposite what Sarah experienced, my life was just obstacles, obstacles, and obstacles. So talking about Macy's, my ticket is expiring going back to Russia. I had 3 months open ticket, and I don't speak English. I have no money. So I'm walking across the town in San Francisco, and I realized someone advised me to ride the bus. So I went to Salvation Army. I didn't even know what Salvation Army is. I don't know ABC. I cannot spell my last name. And I was cleaning houses, so in Tenderloin, and I had some cash, about $5. So I buy eyeshadows, never wore makeup in my life. And I use my hand, and I put green and blue, and I put my lipsticks, and I jump on the first bus, it takes me to Macy's, the shopping area on Geary Street. I knock on the door, I actually walk into the Macy's and I see one word and I'm so excited. I can read in English. It says Lancome, the makeup that I can never afford in Russia. By the way, they had guards by the door. I walk in, I ask for a job. I was hired 13 hours a week. With one condition, I have to sell and meet the goal. I met the goal. So I was so excited. The years of confusion taught me this. In the most difficult moment in your life, if you sit still, you'll find the clarity. As Sarah said, that is connection between our mind is hard. So to survive, I had to dive into the love feeling that I received from my grandmother on the farm. That freedom, that horses, the cows and crickets. And I still go to the farm when I don't know, when I don't have that clarity. I go, when I was reading the book and I have all the notes that you helped me, and thank you for believing in me from 2007. And
thank you, Svetlana. And 1 minute to wrap it up, please.
Okay, so 1 minute. So the thing is, dream big no matter what. Dream like you can never fail ever. Dream like you have everything to publish your book in third language. Or go for that job, and even if you don't know, you will learn. And number 2 is persistent. Number 3 is think on your feet. So when I met a gentleman at the dinner, I had a call that I know the story. I was interrupting him and finishing his stories about his friend Bruce Lee. Well, we end up helping him to publish the book when he was 92, Alan Joe, The Last of the Four Musketeers, Alan Joe's life and friendship with Bruce Lee. So that kind of accident, I had no clarity, but I answered, like Sarah said, the call. So to me, clarity is answering every call that coming from the heart without fear, and dreaming and seeing the first sentence of your book and the last sentence of the book. And the number 4 tip is, it gotta be the lifestyle. Clarity is my lifestyle. I totally commit myself to life, clarity, life. Thank you. Serendipity, I love it. And the more struggles you give me, the smarter I'm going to be, the wiser, the more compassionate I'm going to be, and the world watch it.
Okay, do you see why Svetlana gets crowds on her feet and why people finish her book and say, okay, where can I see her speak? It's, I love the river that is running through this conversation. I keep hearing the word story and calling and answering what wants to happen. Tara Conklin said that our greatest work of art is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. And I love that each of you are telling yourself the story that this matters to me, this calls to me, and I am going to set it in motion. And that is what Ruth Rathblott has done as well. Not only is she the CEO for the Harlem Educational Activities Fund, not only was she the Associate Executive Director of Big Brothers Big Sisters in New York City, she is a walking, talking role model of someone who is on a mission to broaden the perspective of what diversity and inclusion means. Welcome to you, Ruth.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks for including me in this amazing company. And Svetlana, you are definitely hard to follow, as are you, Kian and Sarah, but I'm going to give it my go. Ruth, I want to talk about the diversity on your executive team. This was the call that I received 2 years ago from 2 different people on my board. And I kind of thought I knew what they meant. And as Sam mentioned, I run a nonprofit that focuses on getting young people, underserved young people, to and through college. And I had just made a hire of a white female on my executive team. And so when I asked the 2 members about their conversation about diversity that they wanted to have, they mentioned race. And so I took them through my hiring process. I took them through who had held the position before, and they seemed pretty satisfied with the answer and said, okay, got you, that's helpful. And I said, well, I have a question. I'm curious, do you see me as diverse? And the answer back was, well, you're a woman. And I said, that is true. That lens of diversity around gender, I absolutely fall in. But I'm curious about my limb difference, because if we were together in person, you would notice that I was born missing my left hand. And when I asked them about my limb difference, the immediate reaction was, oh, I don't see you like that. And I said, not asking to be seen like that. I'm asking for it to be acknowledged as part of me and as part of diversity. And what I realized after that conversation, and this was my moment of clarity, while I hid my hand for 25 years of my life, so from the age of 13 to 38, I hid my hand from everyone, from professionally, personally, in all aspects of my life. I truly hid, like they say 60+% of people do in the workplace. I hid. And while the last 10 years I haven't hidden, I realized that I was still hiding. And that was my moment of clarity, because I wasn't sharing my experience of what it was like to have a disability. I wasn't sharing my experience of the shame I felt when people stared too long, or when people didn't ask because they were afraid that they would hurt my feelings. And so what I realized is, through that conversation or that quote from Brené Brown, that shame needs 3 things to exist. It needs silence, it needs judgment, and it needs secrecy. And that's a powerful quote, because shame needs silence, judgment, and secrecy to exist. And I was continuing that shame with myself because I wasn't sharing out my journey and my experience. And so I built out and have been building out for the past 2 years my passion project of broadening the definition of diversity to be more inclusive. And like you said, Sarah, it is our gift. Our uniqueness is our gift. It's the thing that makes us different. It expands our minds, like you talked about, Kian. It makes us live our true lives, Svetlana, like you discussed. And it's the idea of not being in a box, like you talked about, Sam. It's that idea of, it's actually our differences are what bring us together. And so by me sharing out my difference and my journey, I have been able to start to realize that I no longer hold shame around it, and that I'm actually I'm not hiding anymore, because the actual physical part of hiding was difficult. The actual part of not talking about my experience was even harder. So I share that out with you, because the truth is that it isn't really about having others accept us. It's about accepting ourselves. And the person who said that was a great one, Thich Nhat Hanh. So I think I share that out because, again, my moment of diversity and inclusion clarity was, you can hide as much as you want physically, but truthfully, you may still be hiding if you're not sharing your story. So I throw out the idea of broadening the definition of diversity by starting to tell our stories.
You know, I tell you, just listen to the wisdom that's been shared with us from all around the world today. It's, you know, Sarah, you talked about hiding, and in all those years of Maui Writers Conference, every time a memoirist would speak, you know, whether it's Barbara Kingsolver or, you know, Mary, just marvelous memoirist, they would all say that there was one thing they felt they could not say in their book. It was too raw, it was too vulnerable. They couldn't possibly share that. And if they got up the courage to share it, it was what resonated with people. It was what would cause people to get in touch and write these long letters of saying, I thought I was the only one. It's like, you mean someone else is going through that? Someone else? You talked about service. All of you talked about not hiding, sharing how we feel, sharing how we're different. It is our service. In a way, the more intimate we are, the more universal we are, right? And someone's got to go first. It is, Martin Luther King said, the time is always right to do what is right. And I hope that as a result of hearing these stories of whether it's key on, and whether it is creating a community where people can come together with all their differences and their commonality so they feel mutually supported, whether it's with Sarah, and it is whether what's different is that our vision for our life, and we have ambitions and we want things to do, but culturally that's not acceptable. Whether it's Svetlana, and it is the vision that even if we can't speak the language, and even if we only have $1 in our pocket, we can still make our dreams come true if we set them in motion. And what you were talking about, Ruth, is that if we stop hiding and if we start sharing our differences, that we can come together in unity. Ruth Ginsburg said, it's we are different, we are one. And one last story to tie all this together and hopefully to send us out with a resolve and a clarity that we will go first and that we will invite people to our team and to our table. So there is inclusivity. It's years ago, I was holding a staff meeting for my business, and I quoted Eleanor Roosevelt. And I'll always remember Mo Sahu said, "Sam, you've got to stop quoting dead white guys." And, it was like, first he had no idea who Eleanor Roosevelt was, but I was sharing a lot of Henry David Thoreau quotes and Ralph Waldo Emerson quotes and John F. Kennedy quotes. And I think one of the ways, in addition to what everyone has suggested, that we can create more diversity, catalyze more conversations around diversity, is to use quotes from people from different parts of the world. And I put together 50 of the favorite quotes I have found about diversity, about inclusivity, about our differences, about our unity. And if you'd like them, go ahead and get in touch. You registered for this, so you know how to get in touch, and we'll send those to you. And here's our ask, is that the next time you're organizing an event, look around the table. Is there inclusivity? Are there people with differences? Next time you put together a team, look around the table. Is there diversity and inclusivity at the table and on the team? Next time you have a conversation, maybe quote someone who will catalyze a conversation about how we can go first and take responsibility for creating a world where, as Ava says, diversity is not a box to check. It is a reality that should be deeply felt and held and valued by all of us and shared and spoken and contributed by all of us as well. My name is Sam Horn. This has been Clarity Calls. We will put the contact information of all of our speakers up on our Facebook page tomorrow so that you can delve into their work, find out some of the other things that they're doing in the world, their books, their activities and programs. Thank you so much for joining us. And please go ahead and put a comment in chat so that we can give some shout outs and let our speakers know how their words have resonated with you and maybe given you a resolve about going first and setting an example. Albert Schweitzer said that in influencing others, example is not the main thing. It's the only thing. Here's to going first. Once again, thank you all.